So how do we fit for club length? Most people assume that we've got one of these in the bay ready and waiting to wrist to floor. It's the standard procedure for start point on length. But what factors go into it and why is it so important? Have a watch and we'll find out. So traditionally, what most people would assume we start with is your kind of ping style wrist to floor measurement. And that's really what it is. It is a start point. Now, even Ping over the years would say this isn't the answer on length and lie. It's the base point of which you extrapolate out of that from. But using my measurements at just under 6 foot, I'd be standard length, and at a 36-inch wrist to floor, I'd be 2 degrees upright as their baseline. Now, as an example of how different your specs can be, I play a 1/4 inch over standard, but I also play a couple of degrees flat. So ultimately, your static measurement is just that. It's a start point, which you would then use that, if you're using the wrist to floor measurement, you'd use that as a place to start your measurements from and start your testing from. It is not a hard and fast answer. There are so many factors that go into this. You might be 5'8" with short arms and longer legs and actually need standard length or hair longer based on your posture. You might be someone who's 6'3", shorter legs, longer torso, long arms. Retief Goosen, for example, plays pretty much standard length. He's got a long arm length, but he's 6'2", 6'3". So it's not definite rules based on height and wrist to floor, but a start point. We're going to go through a few of the factors now for you. So what are we looking to see from a correctly fitted set of irons, particularly irons in terms of length? So in the middle part of the irons, take a 6 or a 7 iron, we want to be in a position where a player can take an athletic posture, and by that I mean something where the weight's sort of on the middle of the balls of your feet. That way you can use your lower body to balance and to drive off the turf. You can use the ground, you can actually use your lower body there. Be able to keep a nice flat back posture. But ultimately be in a position where you can move, stay balanced, stay in posture, but move athletically and put pace in. If you get the length of the club wrong at the extremities of the set, be it if you err a bit too long at the longer iron end of things, it becomes very hard to strike. But at the shorter end of things, if you get it wrong, if you go too short, then your posture is compromised. And by that I mean that, I get a club that's a bit shorter here, that you're having to sit. If I go to where I want to take a kind of natural back spine angle, I've then got to sit into it. Now this is a 6 iron, so sort of slightly shorter length 6 iron. By the time you get down to the wedges, we're having to really sit into it. So I'm having to crouch. And what that does is if you're kind of squashing your stance down, it's very hard to move without having to do an awful lot of my lower body or come out of it and come back down to the ball to find strike. So ultimately you're compromising your posture and your ability to move athletically. Again, that's going to affect ball striking, it's going to affect consistency and potentially create some injuries itself. So ultimately the correctly fit length allows balance, better posture, but a more repeatable motion. So the key factors that go into this are going to be a player's height. Obviously, you've got to take that into account. If you're 6'4", you're going to be playing a different set of clubs than someone at 5'7", or for ladies juniors, we're going down to kind of 4'5", 4'6", maybe a bit less for juniors. But critically, the club's got to suit the way that you stand to the ball as well. So not just your height, but your proportions. So some players have long torso versus longer limbs. Some players have longer legs, longer arms, and a shorter torso. What that affects your pivot point. So someone with my height with shorter legs and longer body would have a pivot point lower, and therefore by the time they take the posture, if my pivot point's down here, my hands get lower, doesn't need to be as long. Whereas I've got a relatively long leg length, a really high hip bone, my pivot point's here. So my arms are slightly higher up. So relative to my height, I play just a little bit longer. Because if I play more of a standard length, I'm having to reach for the ball a little bit. And again, I'm having to either come out of posture to get down there or sit into it. And both things are bad for the golf swing and for repeatability. The other aspect, injuries. Injuries are a huge part of it. A player who's got a bad back, now a lot of tall players, this tends to be more of an issue than for shorter players, is that you don't want to put strain on a part of the body that's already struggling. So, again, looking from the length side of things, the more players got to reach for it, the more you've got to sit into it. You're putting more strain, you've got to move that lower body out the way, you're putting strain on that lower back. So there are lots of factors that go into what might be kind of the correct start point on length. You have to look at that set and go, okay, how do we make this right for the player? What have you got to take into account? Because ultimately, you've got to put quite a lot of force. The golf swing is quite active, and there's a lot of force and rotation, there's a lot of range of motion going through our bodies. So we don't want to be putting undue strain, especially where there's already an injury. So we often get asked, what's more of a problem, too long or too short? Well, the answer is both can create problems. So there are some brands that have lighter weight head options to go longer than the standard without making them heavy. But if you're going longer than standard, quite a lot of the time, the club just becomes, there's just a lot of mass there. So there's a lot of club to move, and that can make it unwieldy and hard work. And what that does mean is, whilst posturally, we don't have to sit down and get to the ball when the club's long, we can start to find there's just a lot of club to get going. So, in terms of staying balanced and in control, it can become quite hard. This one's that little bit longer. The dead weight goes up, the swing weight goes up, and unless the club head allows you to make it lighter in order to salvage swing weight, it can be a negative playing a heavy club. But ultimately, there's just more club to move, so it becomes harder to time. And unfortunately, if you're a tall golfer, then that's just part of what goes with the territory, is that you require longer clubs to stay in posture. But by staying in posture, you can strike them better. If you play clubs that are on the long side, then there's ultimately you're asking your 6-iron, you're having to be as accurate as you would do with a 5-iron, for example, if you're half inch longer than standard. And so it just becomes a harder club to hit because there's more club to deliver. And it can feel like you're standing a long way away. So if you feel like you've got to move back out the way, I'll pull a ball back here. So if, for me, comfortable posture based on 6-iron would be here. If I go up half an inch, see how much my chin rises up, but it pushes me back a little bit. So either I'm going to push my weight back onto the heels, and there I can't use my toes, I can't use my legs to stabilize, so it actually throws me off balance. But it also, I start to feel like I've got to get out of the way. So you can find yourself falling back off of it, otherwise you might catch the hosel and create a shank. So it can feel like you've got to get yourself out of the way of the shot, and that's never good for ball striking. Conversely, play too short, as we've alluded to already, then I've either got to stand very close to stay in posture, which just means I lose space here. So you lose the room to free your arms up, and again, you've got to get out of the way, or equally speaking, you've got to throw the club out and over the top to get it back into the ball. If I put my normal swing on, trying to take a normal posture and stand closer to it, catch it at the shank. So for me with this, I'd end up to stay with a good back posture and end up having to sit down into it. So yes, it's no different than you're playing a half inch short, it's no different than playing a 7-iron. At this part of the bag, you can kind of make it work. The moment you get down to the wedges, you start to get really kind of sat into it. I've got to sit down into it. So playing too short compromises your posture. Again, there's just lots of leg and body in the way. The angles compress down. So actually moving around those angles and staying in balance is very hard. So to kind of put a swing on down here, I've got to either sit into it or I'm going to come out of it and then have to get back down to it. Which really, from a playing point of view and consistency in ball striking, is probably worse than playing too long. Too long, you can grip down it. Too short, if you try and grip over the top of it, as I'm doing here, you can lose control of the club. So playing too short, and this is obviously going to be particularly pertinent to taller golfers, just really loses you a lot of control, potentially creates some physical limitations around movement and impingements in your lower back. If you're having to sort of get out of the way, then you're going to get compression there, which is never a good thing. So getting that length right really, really does help your golf swing. So the other factor we'd use for determining the best all-around length is someone's ball striking ability. So the factors we'd use in this is if someone's ball striking ability is limited, then actually you can fit the slightly shorter end of the scale. We generally say there's about a ½ inch window that you can fit within and still be correct. So if someone struggles with ball striking, a shorter length club is going to be that little bit easier to find the middle of the face with, so we can err that little bit less long. Whereas if someone has an injury, is a taller player and has an injury and struggles to get down to the ball, then you'd err the slightly longer end if their ball striking can cope with it, because ultimately protecting that injury and keeping them in posture is going to have better results longer term. So again, there are shades of grey in this instance, rather than just a black and white, your X height, Y wrist to floor measurement, Z length. There are some different parameters that can affect this. The other bit is to remember in particular that standard length brand to brand and model to model does change. Length progressions between clubs changes model to model. For example, some of Ping's irons go 5/8 of an inch gap into the longer irons, whereas others are ½ inch. So these are all things to be careful of when recommending clubs and club setups. But equally speaking, we can taper these. So for example, if we're looking to keep short irons long for someone tall, but not make them too hard work on the longer irons, you don't have to have standard length progressions through the set. You haven't got to go ½ inch every club. We can keep the shorter irons a bit longer and just taper the lengths off so they don't get overly long in the longer irons. Again, trying to be conscious of the fact that whilst we might need an inch longer in the short irons, that turns a 5 iron into a 3 iron in terms of length. So tapering those lengths down could keep them as close as possible to playable in the longer irons, whilst keeping them posturally sound, comfortable to use in the shorter irons. So as you can see, there are lots of factors that go into it. It's not going to be the same for every player. Everyone will have different priorities and different importances on certain factors, be it injury prevention or ball striking help. But we're always looking to provide that bespoke solution for the individual player, and part of that is in the length. So I hope that's helped to understand a little bit about how we'd go about fitting for length. If you like this, check out some of the other explainer videos on the website and on our channel. And anything else you'd like us to cover, please let us know. Like, subscribe, and give us an insight into anything you want us to cover, and we'll do it for you.